Good evening. Welcome to DiversiTV Season 4. Tonight's perspective, a Chicano Latino perspective with one of our LCC staff people. If you are new to DiversiTV, welcome. If you are returning, great. Our growing legion of fans. Our seasons roughly correspond to the terms at LCC, and this is our 4th season. DiversiTV's mission is to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. And to that end, our schedule basically goes as follows. We've already started this term, we started with Native, as we always do, then Anglo. Last week was Africans in America. This week is Latino. Next week is Asian. May 21st, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, transgender, two-spirit perspective, disability, and our last show probably will be youth. And perhaps finals week we'll do class, but we'll probably be out by that time. Our guest tonight is James Garcia, the Chicano Latino Student Program Coordinator for Lane Community College, working out of the Multicultural Center. Welcome, Jim.
Nice to be here. Great to be here.
So, where are you from, and where'd you grow up?
Well, I'm from Southern California. I was born in Corona, California, a place about 35 miles east of Los Angeles, and raised in the general area there in a place called Miraloma and Rubidoux, Riverside area. My parents were also born in the same area there in Corona. My mom was born in Corona. My dad was born in Ontario, California. And again, it's like 35, 40 miles away from LA. So I born and raised there and came here to Eugene in 1973.
73?
1973.
What brought you here?
Well, wanted to go to school. I came to the University of Oregon in 1973, and if you know the LA area or Southern Cal, where I'm from, all the smog comes to
it all
the
blows
basin
there, you know.
Where Riverside, you know, there's mountains there, and it stops the smog right there. So I came up here on a camping trip. My dad took us up here on a camping trip when I was in middle school, and kind of liked the green trees and the fresh air here, you know. And so it was one of the schools that I applied to. I applied to Notre Dame and UCLA and U of O, pursuing a program in architecture.
Okay.
And so Eugene was one of my choices, and I was accepted here, and kind of like the clean air here. I was, even though I'm a small, short person, I used to play basketball a lot during lunch breaks in high school and middle school, and we could only play basketball for about 15 minutes before the smog kicked in our lungs. And
yes,
so
right.
I came up here, boy, I could play for hours, you know,
right.
And the fresh air was killing me here. So my lungs got used to the fresh air. And so it was just a lot of things, just to experience another part of the country. And it was an exciting time, actually, because things were happening during the...
Definitely a lot of student activism.
Student activism.
Right.
Chicano movement was happening, of course, in the Southern Cal and Southwest, but there was considerable Chicano movement stuff happening here that I can recall from the 70s.
So then that brings me to looking at what's called Central Latino Americana today, but then was called Chicano Affairs, and they had an office down on 13th around the university.
Yeah,
right?
13th in Lawrence or 13th in Washington Street there.
Okay.
Yeah, it was an attempt by community folks to establish services that were going to serve the Spanish-speaking community and the Latino community. So it was part of that spirit at that time in the early 70s, where you do grassroots things and you start things anew.
Yeah.
And if the mainstream institutions were not going to bother with that, then we had to do something to serve our community.
And that was, let's see, well, the early 70s certainly was a scant few years since actually people of color were even allowed to live within the city limits, free of discrimination, theoretically.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Can you explain for our audience the difference between Chicano and Latino?
Well,
because those are both in the title, right? So
right, and that's part of my title and my job here
Yeah.
too. Actually, when I do presentations in the high schools, when I do diversity training sessions that deal with this topic, that's the number one question that people have in their minds. What do we call folks? What's the right word?
what do you people want to be called?
What's the magic word that I can call you guys?
Without offending you.
Yeah, without offending, but in some cases they really want to use the right word. And
Yeah.
and I just respond by letting them know that there's great diversity within this term, Chicano Latino. And when I speak at conferences or diversity training sessions, I know it's important that people know where I come from, who I am, because then they will know why I'm saying things the way I am and the way I perceive things. And it's important to know that people know that I was raised in Southern California, not in LA, but 40 miles away in LA, and I've been to LA many times, and actually the border towns many times. But when I was growing up, there was a lot of people who looked like me, a lot of people of Mexican descent, a lot of African Americans, and European American folks, and that was the reality of my school district too, my public schooling experience. So. That was my exposure to diversity. It's day in and day out.
And normal then, too.
Yeah, it was, and part of my work here is to address the kind of assumptions that people have about Chicano Latinos. But for me, my parents were born in this country, and they're Mexican Americans. They proudly showed that they were Mexicanos, even though they weren't in Mexico. They were what was once Mexico, California. And of course, in the 1940s and 50s, there was still intense segregation based on race. So you would see the signs, or they would see the signs, no Mexicans or dogs allowed, or no Spanish speakers allowed, no Negroes allowed. It's for whites only. So that was their generation. That was their experience. But we were, my brothers and sisters, we were always taught that we were Mexicanos, even though we weren't born in Mexico. But that was my whole culture. My first sounds of music, my first taste of food, my first sense of family was all Mexican, even though we were in the United States. So that was my identity, Mexicano. But going to high school in the late 60s, a new term or another term reappeared, and that was the word Chicano. And there was an attempt by my generation to recapture our indigenous heritage. Rather than respond to a heritage that's been placed upon some of us for 500 years, and labels and terminology and all that. So
like Hispanic.
Like Hispanic, or even maybe Latino as well.
Yeah.
And again, I'm coming from a perspective that my family raised me from what I consider an indigenous perspective of the world. It wasn't a Western concept of the world. I got the Western concept in the schools. That's what they taught me there. But certainly everything that happened in my first 5 years of my life in my home was from a totally different perspective than what was being presented to me in the schools. So knowing that I wasn't from Mexico, although my culture and my being was, at that time the word Chicano reappeared. And it was an attempt by my generation to reclaim our Mexican heritage, Mexican heritage, our indigenous heritage, capturing a word that was once made negative, Mexican, and make Mexican a positive word, reclaim that word. And Chicano to me is a reflection of that heritage, and it really refers to sons and daughters of Mexica, of the Mexicano people. And that accurately reflected my life experience. I wasn't from Mexico, but I'm a son and daughter of Mexicanos. So that's the way I see the word Chicano. Latino is a more inclusive and acceptable term to describe all of Latin America, and it would include those of us who have indigenous and African, Asian, and European descents. So it's a catch-all word if you want, but it's for me, my perspective is that its use is limited to a catch-all word.
Yeah.
Just like the word Hispanic is a term that is good for census collection, if we have a connection to Spanish heritage.
Right.
For statistical purposes, yes, but culturally it really doesn't go well with respecting the diversity of the Latino community.
Yeah, I mean, both those terms can be somewhat problematic because a lot of times, I mean, as you sit here defining Latino now, I mean, a lot of people don't necessarily think of that as a catch-all term, as, say, inclusive, say, of dark-skinned Cubans or whatever, right?
Right. Right. In my experience, folks from Latin America, I mean, that's a new word for these folks that's been brought to my attention, that, you know, they consider themselves Salvadoreños or Guatemaltecos or Cubanos, but this word Latino appears in the U.S. context, and so it's a new vocabulary, and it's hard to get used to that.
It's part of our interesting and sometimes amusing conversation about race that actually isn't a conversation most of the time, but a set of assumptions which we may be party to basically from common usage, but not. It's often ill-defined.
Right.
So when you use that term Mexican, right? So want to explain that?
Yeah. Well, Mexica is what people understand now as have been presented in the schools as the Aztecas and the Aztecs, who founded their community in what is now Mexico City. And their city was called Tenochtitlan, and it was founded in 1312. But the story behind the Mexica people is that they came from an area, what is now known as either the northern Mexico area or the U.S. Southwest area, and in their travels, in their stories, they were, and their beliefs, they were believed to look for a symbol that will let them know that that was the place that they were to settle. And the symbol is now captured in the Mexican flag, and that is of an eagle perched on a cactus with a serpent in its mouth, and that's the symbol that you see in the Mexican flag. But in their story, that's what, in their history, that's what they were looking for. And that's where they settled in what is now Mexico City there.
I remember hearing that story in an elementary school because, you know, even though, you know, I grew up in LA Unified, I mean, here we are in Alta California, right? And so, you know, hearing about the missions and Father Junipero Serra and, you know, those dominant mythologies that you so absorb with the Columbus thing, right? They were looking for a plot of land or something, and they saw an eagle eating a snake, and oh, that's where we're supposed to be.
Right. And my generation, you know, rediscovered that heritage, and that's where we get the term Aztlan, which means the homeland, which is the original area where these folks, where the Mexica people started from, which is the U.S. Southwest or northern Mexico. So in my generation, we capture that history. And that's why you have even a student movement group that was called MECHA, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicanos de Aztlan. So Chicano Student Movement of Aztlan to refer to that, the Mexica heritage. It's, you know, the word Chicano Latino naming has been in my past 30 years, it's been one of the most controversial.
No doubt.
More conversations about what do we call ourselves? Like we're starting a new group, a new center. You know,
you're trying to take back America.
You know, do we call it Chicano Affairs Center anymore? Is it outdated, or we call it Centro Latino Americano now to be more inclusive? Do we call it the Latino Student Union? Do we call it MECHA? What do we call it? I mean, it's been one of the most talked about issues among students and community members in my 30 years here in Eugene. And the struggle for me is that you have folks participating in a conversation with different levels of information and knowledge about even the history.
Some of it wrong then, right?
Well, some of it from the colonizer. Some of that has been a story that's been given to them. And others, they know that a story's been given to them, but they know there's more to the story. And that's been the most challenging part of trying to have a conversation with students or community about what do we name ourselves? What do we call this program, you know? And it doesn't need to be ethnic based. You really have to say Chicano or Latino or Mexican, Mexicano or things of that nature. So
I mean, is it tied to a land base? Is it a state of mind? What does it mean today? And
and it, you know, if the word was used reappeared in the 1960s, the word Atzclan or Chicano. So in 2008, is it outdated? You know, has it lost its use, and why? Yeah. And so that's been an interesting thing to experience and to look at.
So I guess, is it unifying? And when you think of within that diversity within the community and how a community thinks about itself and how that changes with education. When you basically identify yourself as the program coordinator for that kind of program, using both those, what kind of programs and activities do you do for those Chicano, Latino, or other students and their familias?
Well, there's some activities that students bring to my attention, what we need here at Lane, and then there's some activities that is part of my role here at Lane to implement. But I think an important part of what students want me to do is share information about college, share information about financial aid and scholarships in the high schools, in the schools. So a lot of us in MCC are involved with the school districts to get that word out, for us to be known in the schools, to just share information. In my role, I have to share it in Spanish and English. Yeah. And it's not a simple translation. There's a cultural way of presenting it in both languages. So it's a challenge in terms of resources and all that, because when you have it just doubles the time that I have to devote to ensure that there's language accessibility to the information that we have. We're going to have, for example, through a grant from the Gear Up program with the Oregon University system, we're going to have a Spanish information night for Spanish-speaking parents in Springfield High School on May 20th, and everything's going to be in Spanish practically, for the parents anyway. The students that I work with are mostly bilingual, so we can talk in English to the students and information can be presented to them in English. But for the parents, we need to provide them with information in Spanish. And the U.S. Department of Education has a website that has materials that folks can order, or we can order, so that we can give these to the parents. And so that'll be one of our goals for that event, is to make sure we have booklets for these parents so they can, on their own, look through the information, the terminology in Spanish. We'll provide workshops to provide general responses to what the financial aid and scholarships is all about. The question to me, what I've learned here in Lane County, and perhaps in a national scale too, is that the myth that Latino parents aren't involved with their education of their sons and daughters. I mean, there's great interest. I mean, the parents keep me busy.
Yeah, I don't even know where that came from. Well, that's like the lazy Mexican. I mean, do you know the lazy Mexican? There's the myth
that we're not interested in school. We're just interested in just working and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so the parents are extremely interested. I've been a part of the 4J school district outreach program to Latino parents in the Churchill area, in the North Eugene area, and we've had 100 parents there, and so they're there. They want to know what how do I access these teachers, and how do I make a phone call to the school district or the schools when they don't have anyone to speak Spanish? What is this information that teachers are bringing to me, to my son or daughter? It's all in English. I mean, it's pretty basic to what people should be doing in terms of education.
Well, when you talk about language accessibility, right? I mean, it's not like they're handicapped. You're not bringing in. It's not like a wheelchair ramp. It's like, okay, creating a welcome climate that increases, the intelligence not only of the system but everyone.
Right.
Because that piece about, I mean, what I was struck about when you were just talking about 100 parents. Yeah. Could you get 100 Anglo parents to a college? Meeting? These days and times. I mean, again, I mean, one of the things I was talking about with one of my clients today about the thing that I had been struck with is dealing with people who, for example, spent Anglo families that spent multiple generations in the woods working for, timber companies and stuff like that, and, barely completed high school, or didn't complete high school because they always thought that they would have jobs in the woods, and, basically shunned getting, going to college because that, and here you have, you know, in your case, you're an American citizen, and that's what you go straight to.
Right.
But, you know, a lot of folks who are new to the country, yeah, they want their kids to go to college, and they understand and they buy into it,
Right.
you know, and they may not speak the language, but they're into doing it.
Well, certainly, you know, what the community wants me to do and what students want me to do is share college information that they're not getting in a traditional way of receiving that information
Yeah.
to all students.
Right.
Some of this might not be dealing with Spanish at all, just might be dealing that they're Latinos or
Mm-hmm.
Chicanos, they have brown skin, and somehow that creates a barrier there. From my own personal experience, you know, like I said, I applied to Notre Dame, UCLA, and Oregon. And when I told that to my counselor, I mean, there was just laughter there. She just
Right.
couldn't
In
fathom.
Corona.
In Riverside.
Riverside, yeah.
In high school. And she just could not imagine that she thought I was just out of my mind, that I was
Right.
listing these top 3 universities,
Right.
you know. And then my friends in my senior year, they said, well, we'll see you next year at the Riverside Community College. And I go, well, okay.
Right.
I mean, it was...
Yeah, the assumption is community
There it is.
college, like
So-
technical school, like
Yeah,
you, an architect?
yeah.
Architect?
There was about 500 Latino students in my high school, and about 250 graduated, and about 5 of us probably went to a university. Maybe 3 or 4 that I know of went
Wow.
to university. So, and you know, that was in 1973.
0.5%.
That was in 1973.
Wow.
And here we are in Eugene, Oregon in 2008, and we still hear the same stories about assumptions. And that's
Right.
what I try to do in my work, both, you know, at Lane and my off times. You know, it's always dealing with people's assumptions about, you know, expectations about Chicano Latino students.
Right. Whether they're college ready or whether they're even interested in doing
Right.
farm work or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
Right.
And you know, and I encounter, you know, well-intended educators, European American educators, but their efforts are not supported by the infrastructure, you know, and so
Talk about that.
Well, you know, they've gone through a process of being certified to be a teacher or
Yeah.
counselor without having
Yeah.
anything to do with knowing anything about Chicanos or Latinos,
Right.
if any people of color.
We're
And-
required to know about
and-
Shakespeare.
yeah.
They're not required to know about Frida Kahlo
Right.
or, you know, whoever. Yeah.
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 So that's an infrastructural thing right there, that there's a certification and that they are able to teach folks who are different than themselves, and it's not that. My experience with educators is that educators of color is that they've used their personal life experience to incorporate in their professional delivery, because we've had that experience of dealing with difference.
Yeah.
And so, but even when we bring in our life experience, that isn't even honored or recognized by traditional rewards and recognition systems within the structure. So these are, you know, my role here is really multidisciplinary, because it's got to be.
You kind of have to
I have to be an advocate,
Right.
because I can't just tell the parents, here's the information, and the parents are sharing stories with me. I have to be connected to folks who are able to respond to those kind of issues that that the parents and the students are sharing with me,
Yeah,
that they wouldn't share with another counselor or teacher.
Well,
for
it's
whatever
not
reason.
only who to go to, but knowing that who you're sending them to is also going to be an advocate
Yeah.
in their particular system,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
You know, a mutual friend of ours who used to be at the U of O and is now at Loyola basically related a story when I was doing some consultant work for the local Eugene school district. So I'll just name him Marshall Sauceda, okay? So Marshall, as a parent, basically the U of O was doing a program to basically have students of color, you know, in
Right.
middle school,
Right.
introduce the concept, you know,
Right.
because that's one of the things you have to do that's supported by the literature, which happens with white kids
Right.
too. You know, it's like, okay, you're going to college, especially if your parents are going to college, or even if you're not, your parents haven't gone to college. They want you to be better than they are, so big expectation is to go to college. So this program basically was introducing students of color in middle school,
Yeah.
right? And basically, you know, handing out flyers, and all the counselors had to do is, oh, you see a brown, black, yellow, red person, you know, hand them a flyer, and basically, right?
Right.
So, you know, Marshall's running this program, and he's waiting as a parent for the school to contact him or for his kid to bring it in, bring the flyer in, and it didn't happen, so he calls the school. And the Anglo counselor says, well, we felt there was a stigma with this program. And stigma? What stigma? Well, that you were targeting students of color to go, well, wait a minute. Encouraging students of color to go to college. What's the stigma about that? Right? And they were uncomfortable, and they wouldn't answer. They felt, well, maybe there's some racism. Like, I don't know where they got this idea, but that's quotes, right? Because I'm working as the consultant doing, trying to get you to understand what the experience of kids of color are here. And here's a perfect entree to, if you really want them to be quote-unquote American and melt in, then, that's one intention of the school system, right? And college is one assimilative institution to do that. So where's the stigma?
And that's been my experience when we try to do outreach programs. Somehow educators act out their assumptions or stereotypes or biases in their professional role, and there's no research to back up their behaviors or their judgments on this is a stigmatized program. Based on what?
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of personal decisions being based on biases and assumptions by professional educators, and that concerns me a lot. Yeah. Because we need more students of color or Latinos in as counselors and teachers, but when they see the behavior and interactions between some of these educators, they don't want to do that. And so we have to provide these programs to deconstruct that experience or let them know that there's a greater picture there that's happening, and they're playing out the role that was given to them. And so that's what we try to do. And at least that's what I try to do in any kind of effort or opportunity that I have to reach out to Chicano Latino students. Yeah, it's always about deconstruction. And we have a summer program here at Lane that we've had for about 5 years. The Rites of Passage are the Latino programs called Puertas Abiertas, and we have students here for about 4 weeks on this campus. And what the students are saying to me is that their whole entire experience with education or a learning environment in the K-12 schools has not been a rewarding or positive one.
How so?
And so they come here, and they're at a college campus, and they have educators who can understand what they're saying, and we can talk Spanglish or Spanish or English. We talk about our cultural experiences and cultural heroes and history and all that, and we can talk about it. We have community educators, so they experience this for 4 weeks. They're on this campus, they eat in the cafeteria here. They feel safe. They see that, and I tell them that, as well as our teachers, that if you feel that you've been treated differently on this campus, we need to know, because we will respond to that. And we show them our value statements, our diversity statements, our core values, our harassment, discriminations posters, so that they know they're protected. We're proactive on that. And they like that because they feel that they can go to someone and that the institution, or there's something in place to respond to racism or being called, go back to Mexico or something like that, which are unwelcoming things. And so they just...
And you're an American citizen, and you're told that.
4 weeks here, and they ask for more. They want, and this is the summer. I mean, they come here at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they leave around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They want more. And they've asked to have a year-long program here at Lane. And so what I've tried to respond to that, because of our capacity issues, I will be offering 3 Chicano Latino leadership courses next year here at Lane. And I've arranged it with the school districts for high school students to participate in those courses. So the Puerta students who want more contact with Lane on a year-round basis, they will be able to take these courses for college credit and high school credit. So... But it's their idea of saying, I want to be part of this. But what's happening is that when they go back to school, now we deconstructed a story that's been given to them. Now they know what the whole play is all about. And so now they're not apt to act out a role that's been given to them once they're provoked.
By the school and the school's expectations.
Because they have been taught how the system works, and this is where you go. And if all else fails, you got community people who are here to help you out.
To back them up, to guide them in case there's no resources within the school, right?
And we're just saying there's another story besides just violence and anger and demeaning other people.
Right.
You know, there's a story of self-respect for yourself. There's a story of our history. There's a story of beauty. And these are contributions. You know, you've been part of the Rites of Passage, you know. What
but to make it visible for the audience, because you know each of the Rites of Passage programs basically is for youth of color. So there's Chicano Latino one, there's an African American one, there's a Native American one, there's an Asian one. Each one of them has a different focus.
Right.
And while the African American one tends to basically reach down into middle school and high school, Puertas is basically doing a college focus more exclusively. So you're dealing with seniors and juniors?
Well, part of it for us is that we're dealing with demographics. So there's a lot of Latinos in our area, and most of the students are you know, from 10th to 12th grade. We're having some students who are finishing in 8th grade and going into 9th. So we're trying to provide some transitional experiences for students to go through. In fact, this year...
Those transition years are pretty dangerous in terms of people dropping out.
So 8th to 9th, and this summer we have an exciting component to our program, and that is in collaboration with the Women's Center. We're going to have a Transiciones class for the female students. And Transiciones, not only in the context of high school to college, but Transiciones in the context of being a female, and what responsibilities you have for yourself and what responsibilities you have for your family. What are the transitions now that you're growing up? And so you have these other obligations now. If you're going to participate in college life, you have these other expectations too. How do you let go of your family responsibilities so that you're not torn apart? So we'll have a week-long class. It's called Puertas a Transiciones. And so I'm really excited about that, because it is about providing opportunities for students to kind of deconstruct and have a conversation of what's happening. We also have a week-long class for the males and the females separate, where we talk about what it is to be a man, a Latino man. You know, so what is the society's
more along
version?
The lines of the rights, anthropological rites of passage,
exactly,
you know, cultural definition.
So what are the behaviors you see in man in Latino culture or in mainstream
stereotypically
culture?
and real?
Right. What do you see every day, and what do you think should be a man in your perspective? So we're trying to deconstruct. We recognize these are images that they are being exposed to, but we're trying to provide them with different stories, and especially the women, because of the images of women in the media, and how, you know, you look at some of the Latina magazines. I mean, it's about makeup, it's about cosmetic, it's about looking thin, and you know, and so we have a class to talk about that. Let's do some critical thinking about, is that what it is to be a Latina?
Real women have curves.
Real women have curves. Right. So of course, we show movies that bring out these issues too. We try multiple ways to bring out these issues. What we're trying to do is validate what we believe is happening in their lives. And so once we as adults recognize that, then they're able to enter a conversation. Because too many times, I think, in their K-12 experience, is that they don't feel safe in saying something,
right?
Or they're not sure if a person is able to respond to that issue, you know, because of the demographics of our teaching and counseling force. So we address all those issues that they experienced in K-12. We design a program in the 4 weeks, and the 4 weeks, I think, captures. They keep that lifelong. I mean, the stories that they tell me after they've gone back to school, they're different people. You know, they don't get in trouble anymore, or anger's not their first response. And they feel proud because they can respond with knowledge, with history, with another story. You know, and that's what it's all about. It's about bringing another story. But our program, the program name, you know, we didn't call it Chicano Program, we didn't call it Tino Program, but Connie Mesquita and I, we came up with the term Puertas Abiertas. So it means open doors, and that's what we're trying to do. It's just any door. The student chooses the door, but at least our role is to provide an opportunity for these folks to know that there are doors that are open, and because they in their experience,
or that you must open, and here's how you do it.
This is how you do it, because I think what they've experienced for the most part, at least the students that I interact with, the doors have been closed. They've wanted to open up that door, but it's been locked.
Yeah, yeah.
Or it's been a very difficult door to go through because there's another door. It's like smoke and mirrors. You know, what do you do? And that's where, again, going back to the original question is about, you know, I think what I need to do is in my role is to provide clear college information and financial aid information so that they know that there is a path if they choose that. Our Puertas program is not a college program. It's not an anti-drug program. It's not an anti-anything program. It's a pro-student program. You know, we don't come from a deficit perspective. We firmly believe that they have it in them, and so we want to provide an opportunity for their beauty to come out in whatever form. And I asked a question of students today. I started another new program called Puertas Conversations. And I'm starting at Kelly Middle School. And I meet once a month with 7th grade Latino students, and it's just to have a conversation. What's on your mind? What are you going through as a Latino student here in Kelly or Eugene or, you know, in this country? What's happening? So it's just conversations that we have. But one of the things I said about the conversation is that, well, you know, if this student here says she likes chemistry and she just likes to work in a lab, so how are you going to respond to that? You know, are we going to respond to laughter? And if we do respond to laughter, why? Is it because our expectations that, you know, we don't belong in chemistry classes or laboratories?
Or is your response to name some Latina chemists that have invented stuff?
They don't know that. They have no knowledge of that. Well, once they do have a knowledge of that, then they can, even if it was always in them, that, I want to study chemistry, and they had to receive a presentation that these are Latina physicists and chemists and scientists. Wow, there's the connector. There's a story.
You mean there's a story that I can emulate.
If another person says, you know, laughs and says you can't be a chemistry person, that person still was exposed to the story, and that person can do research and talk and read about that person there. So our curriculum is about sharing stories from community perspectives, our own life stories. But also, I've been ordering books that have a collection of biographies. I want these students to be exposed to as many stories as possible. And hopefully, there's one story that they're going to connect to, you know. And it's, you know, even though, you know, being Mexicano, and there's a lot of Mexicanos in this community, Mexicanos certainly need to know who they are as Salvadoreños and Guatemaltecos and Chilenos. But then we need, after we know who we are, we need to understand who other communities within the Latino sphere there. And that's part of the leadership. They need to know there's a connection there, you know, between Central Americans and South Americans and U.S., you know, North Americans. And why are we using this language, you know? So,
the language of the colonizer as opposed to our indigenous language.
Yes.
So you came up here to study architecture. Who was your role model? I mean, you know, like, you know, the architect of Tenochtitlan, or why architecture? Who inspired you to do that?
Well, part of that is my life experience. We've always lived in the house that we built ourselves. We built 3 different houses. Okay. So from a very early age, I was used to looking at frames and foundations and, you know, wiring and plumbing and all that stuff. And so it was exciting to me. So that was one of my my exposures too. Another career goal that I shared with my mom was that I wanted to be a farmer, because I also grew up in a rural area and grew up with my grandfather, who lived a block away, and he had 3 or 4 acres of land, and he raised squash, corn, beans, and he had a stand. He had a vegetable stand right there.
Definitely in the indigenous staples
I just loved that. You know, just getting up early in the morning and watering the corn and see it grow, and it was really neat. So, but living in the houses that we built, that was my exposure. And U of O has an architecture school, so did Notre Dame, UCLA. But it was really difficult because there was only maybe 20, 25 Chicano students at that time that I knew of.
On the entire campus?
In 1973, fall 1973, and it was interesting to me. And I share this because this is what I try to do in my work now and what I've been trying to do for the past 30 years. But remembering going on campus and remembering people asking me what I was doing on campus. You know, was I lost?
Was I lost?
Or, you know,
do you speak English?
The programs over there that you're into, and I was living in the dorms, and some of my friends
Who were they referring to HEP then?
Or yeah,
what?
they were referring to the farm worker program, or Upward Bound program.
Right.
And so I remember a conversation with one of my dorm mates, and they, we lived in the dorms, and he was surprised to see me in his class at the university. He said, "I thought you were in the other program." I go, "What are you talking about?" So what that taught me is that in California, even the European Americans, the white students who went to the U of O from California, they saw me as a student because they saw all facets of the Chicano Latino experience over there. But Oregonians didn't. They only had a very limited, narrow view of Chicano Latinos, either through the media or just lack of interaction with Chicano Latinos. And so they, they just assumed that I was at the wrong place. Right. And they assumed that I was part of a special program, and couldn't understand that, no, I was going to the university and studying architecture and stuff like that. So, but I 30 years later, in 2008, I still see those kind of interactions, not as much as it was before, because it's really hard to avoid Latinos now.
But, and they're persistent. So, the irony, 2 days ago, I was at the volunteer training for the Olympic trials. I decided to sit in, and because some of our mutual friends were there, right, as part of the panel. And there have been that Fox News piece about, outrage. How do you talk to black people? Well, okay. So how you talk to black people is, the scenarios that were presented were exactly what you had just talked about, where people assume, oh, well, are you an athlete because you're a person of color? You couldn't possibly be a student, right. And basically depicting volunteers, saying, okay, so most of the training was about dealing with people's assumptions in, a homogenous community, which, in fact, of course, it's not an accident that it was homogenous. Right. It was designed like that from Jump Street, and so diversity's only really been allowed here legally since 65. So people aren't used to, Chicano architects or, whatever, So, people have to be educated, especially, the average age of the volunteer were, people who were retired, who'd lived here and just weren't used to dealing with some of the scenarios that were presented, like, racial epithets, thrown at students, from other students. Oh, well, that couldn't happen here. Well, yeah, it does on a daily basis. So this is people's lived experience. We're not making this up. We're not looking to do trouble. So how you talk to people of color is oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. Here's where you can get help. Or, just looking at your assumptions, questioning them, and dealing with those particular things. It
was an interesting experience because once they found out I was a university student, then they wanted to know my ethnic background. So the ethnic backgrounds that was associated with me was Japanese, Korean, Filipino, but never Mexican. That was the last.
Never.
That wasn't in her mind.
Even with the last name Garcia.
No.
Well, Garcia, okay, sure.
Maybe Filipino because of the Spanish colonization.
Right.
But still, even then, not knowing my last name, they would look at me and then they would go down the ethnic list there, and it came out to be Korean or Filipino, maybe Japanese, but never a Mexicano person. Yeah. And so these are the kind of things that I try to provide opportunities for students to deal with in terms of role playing, and so validate this is still happening, but how do we deal with that? And I share these stories with students, and they feel a connection there. They're just amazed that these things have happened to me, and they're saying, well, why are you teaching at a college, and why do you have it together and all that stuff?
And how do you keep it together?
How do you keep it together? Yeah. And I tell the students, I'm very honest with the students, and I remember last summer I just told the students, I'm a very angry person. I'm very angry. And they're just shocked at that. I go, Jim, you're one of the most peaceful, mellow guys. Look at the way you dress, man. You just don't cause it, And I go, how do I deal with my anger? I'm really angry. How do I do it? And one of the students got it. And he goes, you deal with it because you know your history. And you know, and you're able to respond. And that's what they tell me. Boy, you know how to respond to people. And I said, well, was I born with that, or how did I do that? And they come up. I always pose the question, and they say, "Yeah, we got to read these books." Yeah, we got to stay in school.
We got to read these books.
We got to stay in school.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the textbook you showed me in the office yesterday.
I can't yell at somebody else. I get suspended. Because if we want to be like what Jim is trying to do here, then we got to not respond with violence or first impression. We just got to pick up the book and show people we can read and actually respond in class discussion. There's more than one story than Columbus.
Right.
So
there's multiple stories.
Yeah, those are the conversations I think that stays with them, and that's the conversation that stay with me. I mean, because I was ready to leave after 2 weeks here at the U of O when I was a freshman, but I do recall I changed my major to history, and I had to go to my advisor. Walking in the PLC building, I saw this farm worker sticker. You know, it says our child
UFW?
UFW sticker, you know, and I go, wow, someone here in Eugene or Oregon knows about the farm workers, you know. And it was Dr. Coleman, Dr. Ed Coleman.
Okay.
And so I've shared the story with other people, but that made a big impression on me, and I stayed because of that. So, okay, fine, there's someone here who I can talk to.
If only one someone.
If it's only one, it's one, and that's what I need. That I'm not crazy. That when I'm talking, people can respond to that. You know, so I knew, and he had that sticker on his door. I said, wow, and so we've been friends ever since. It's been over 30 years. But that just a symbol, just a sticker, just having a Chicano professor, just having a Chicano book. These students have never picked up a book written by a Chicano or Latino. They never seen poetry.
What was that textbook, you know, that history book you showed me yesterday?
Yeah, 500
That's bilingual, 500 years, right?
Yeah. And just showing it that it exists, it's there, you know. So
and you didn't have that coming up.
No. But that's part of my strategy in reaching out to these students is showing them that there is, you know, that we have written books, not only since the 60s or 70s, but since we've been people, we've been a community, and that's where we go back into the, you know, the indigenous expressions and so forth. So, yeah.
So, in terms of, you know, I would say that you're successfully bicultural, and sometimes, you know, there are other people, certainly African Americans, that have said to be successful, you have to be essentially schizophrenic, where you're basically living in at least two worlds, right? So bilingual, but not just bilingual, but also bicultural, and actually even more like multicultural, because there's multiple cultures in operation.
Right.
So how do you do that? Reading, and how do our Anglo brethren do that? Because they're basically raised with that, you know, Columbus discovered America narrative, and maybe unaware that there's a whole entire history there.
Well, it's an interesting question because my last term at the University of Oregon, there was an ethnic studies class that was taught, probably one of the first to be taught at the University of Oregon by graduate students. And I was exposed to ethnic literature. And one of the books was called God is Red by
Vine
Deloria Jr. Okay. And what struck me with his book, and I've read many of his writings because it really connects with me, it goes back to my life experience where I lived a world that was based on the natural world, and that's my grandfather growing the crops and in the sunlight and the water. And then I going to school, I learned a mechanical world. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to design houses and do the math and do the physics and all that, which is a very different approach.
Yeah.
So that's my biculturalism. It's not just culture in terms of food, but it's also about having respect for the natural world and having acknowledgement of the mechanical world that's built around us now, that mandates our society now, and having a foot in both worlds. And that's what I try to tell the students, is that you need to have a foot in the natural world. That has kept us alive for time immemorial.
Like our workshop at the sustainability conference. It's about survival.
The language that students are using is that's old-fashioned. You know, that was in Mexico. And I'm trying to say, well, it's not old-fashioned. It's traditional. There's different languages you can use that. And it is to be bicultural. You have to participate in this new world, but know its limitations. And perhaps the natural world, in the way it's been practiced before the arrival of the mechanical world, has its limitations too. But we have to acknowledge that there's more than one world, there's more than one way of doing things, and that's being bicultural and even multicultural in your outlook. So that's the way I've been able to deal with it. I've had a lot of Western education, but I need to have, and I'm very fortunate to have folks like Vine Delori who can write to the Western people, because I've been indoctrinated in the Western culture, but still not compromising what the indigenous knowledge is all about. And the one that I was making reference to, the diversity workshop that we did, was power in place. So how can Native American students participate in science in the Western world and sharing that science from an indigenous perspective rather than compromising into a Western construct of what science is all about?
Yeah. In other words, indigenous science, where you're not objective outside of a process. You're part of it. You're connected to it.
At least there's more than one way to approach science. So it's not, for me, it's not meant to diminish another perspective approach of science, but it is to say that there's more than one approach, right? I mean, one exercise I do with students that they're just amazed. I say, well, we're going to do math today. And I do that Mayan mathematics exercise.
Right. The dots and the bars and things like that. Yeah.
I said, oh, we don't want to do math, because they're thinking about the Western concept of math. And I go, well, we're going to do some Mayan mathematics, and they only use 3 symbols. In fact, they use that concept of the zero, one of the first communities to do that. And they use this bar. And so we're going to calculate some numbers here. We're going to do some math. And so they're just kind of, well, no, we can't do math. But the way I explain it and the way the Mayans approach math is based on a natural world concept. And less than 15, 20 minutes later, they're able to do the math, Mayan math waves, because there's only 3 symbols. And if and it's what's really neat, if I have 20 students, 5 students would get it right away what I'm saying. And so they become the teachers of the others who don't get it. And so I do it at Matcha conferences, and I tell them, write your birth date on in the Mayan way on your folders, and they do it. And so there's something unique. That's their expression there.
That's sort of empowering, because you're going back to something that came out of the natural world, and that still relates to the mechanical world and bridges them very nicely. Can we go to that shot on Elmo? Can you talk about that? This event, you referenced it earlier in our conversation.
Yes, this is an opportunity for Spanish-speaking parents to receive information on college information, what classes their sons and daughters should be taking in high school, the types of financial aid and scholarships that are available for them. So we'll have presentations in Spanish. We'll have food, of course. We have to have food there, Mexican food there for the families and the students. Students will be receiving information from a student panel as well about what college life is. And a new thing that we're going to incorporate this year is having a time for parents to know what they can do to support their kids when they're in high school or in college. And the past 2 years, we've asked educators to submit nominations for outstanding Latino students that they've seen day in and day out. And we received thus far over 170 nominations. So we're going to recognize 170 students that evening as well. And Selco Credit Union has been very supportive of this event and has provided scholarships for students as well.
Cool.
And so it's an exciting event. It's part of our collaboration with the Oregon Gear Up program. A terrific sponsor in Springfield School District and Lane Community College. So May 20th, 5 o'clock, and we'll also have the new Mariachi de Sol from Springfield High School performing as well. So it's about youth. It's about celebrating our youth and having family there and parents there and giving information that's really important to the futures.
So final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Well, this is, I've been here for 30 years, and the community has grown immensely, and I think some institutions and programs are responding to the growing Latino community. Others really need to catch up, and I think it's unfortunate that we still have
You don't have to name names, but...
Well,
it basically can show in whether or not they're responding. Because, I mean, I've been at Lane here at LCC for 17 years, and I remember that being part of the strategic plan when they were projecting the whole population demographic, and
Right.
you know, so certainly, you know, there's some institutional support for what you're doing in
Right.
terms of, you know, expanding it, and certainly there needs to be more to be done, and other institutions need to be looking at that reality too.
Right, right. Well, I think being here for 30 years, I think it's, you know, it should have happened 30 years ago, but when community members approach colleges or universities and school districts about ideas about what's good for our community, what's good would be good for the students, I think it's up to the administrators in the schools to respond to that and not question it or not compromise it. We have the ideas through experience. We know, we've lived that experience. And from our perspective, lived experience is very valuable knowledge.
Yeah.
It's all right to have our bachelor's and master's and doctorate degrees, but, you know.
It's all right and natural, even.
But through that educational process, did it give you anything to help out, to address indigenous expression? Did it help out to have conversations with Latino students about being white or being brown or having a Spanish surname or not having a Spanish surname or being biracial or multiracial?
Speaking a language or not. Yeah.
Speaking a language or not. It's a valuable skill set, and part of it is through educational institutions if they're able to offer those courses, but an important part to me is lived experience. Live with the community, see the community for what they really are, and don't pay attention to the media or the images are out there. So
learn to resist that.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity. A lot of things are happening at Lane Community College for Latino students. We have the ESL program that's on campus here.
Yeah.
We have the Transiciones program, our summer programs. There's a lot of stuff happening here.
So thank you for coming. If you have comments, want to see other guests, give us feedback at liveclass@lanecc.edu. This has been DiversiTV. Thank you for watching. Tune in next week.